Welcome to a walk around Main Street, Poultney, and a journey into American history. I'm Willem Lang, and I'll be your guide on a tour that explores one town's connections with American history. We'll get to know a town that evolved from the frontier into a trading center, a town shaped by farming and quarrying, by tourism and teaching. More than 3/4 of the buildings in this historic district are considered historically intact. They've stood through the eras that define this town. And each era brought a new wave of immigrants who mixed their home culture with the community already here. On this walk, we'll visit 2 centuries of history. There are changes here, certainly, but Poultney today is not so different from Poultney yesterday. We'll start our walk in front of the stone bridge. Now let's begin. We're standing above U.S. Route 30 that follows the old Poultney Turnpike. Before the turnpike, the mail post was an uncertain event at best, and travel was no faster than walking. But in 1806, some enterprising investors formed the Poultney Turnpike Company to create a toll road. 100-man labor parties and ox-drawn plows smoothed the rough and twisting trail. At the end of one 4th of July work party, the townspeople celebrated with a community dinner and 16 toasts to the patriotic diggers and to the ladies who got the meal. By 1811, the new privately owned Poultney Turnpike was completed, connecting the town to other turnpikes and toll roads. Poultney's location was a strategic halfway point in the 2-day journey between Burlington to the north and the Hudson River near Albany to the south. The turnpike secured Poultney's role as a prosperous transportation center from the 1800s and into the 1840s. Until the canals and then the railroads were built, this turnpike was the best route for stagecoaches and wagons, which brought regular mail to the frontier. Local farmers could transport their produce to markets in Albany. Cattle prodders, herding their stock to the markets of Boston, would pause here for the night. This commerce would bring competition between the townspeople of this village, once called West Poultney and known as a small milling hamlet, and the more prosperous East Poultney. These 2 villages, west and east, grew up side by side 2 miles apart. A rivalry between the villages centered on the location of the post office for the entire township. East Poultney argued that the post office should be located in the east, where all the churches were. West Poultney countered by hauling limestone by ox cart at great expense to build this Methodist church, completed in 1822. Such a grand stone church tipped the balance. When added to the impacts of the flood of 1811 and the completion of the Poultney Turnpike, the stone church ensured the eventual move of the post office to the west side, which effectively made this the center of town. And that's why West Poultney is known today simply as Poultney. From 1841 until 1869, the building was occupied by the Millerite sect, whose leader, a one-time Baptist minister from the Poultney area named William Miller, had forecast the second coming of Christ at various dates between 1843 and 1844. Based on this prophecy, the followers gave away their goods and went atop a hill to wait. After the forecast went unfulfilled, this came to be known as the Great Disappointment, and the Millerite movement began to unravel. Its followers returned to their original churches or joined other movements such as the Shakers, as well as launching the Adventist movement. In 1869, the Masonic Society purchased the stone church and occupied it for over a century. They added the Greek Revival portico with Doric columns sometime after 1918. Before a road cut was bulldozed around 1935, this part of Main Street was far steeper, a perfect place to sled. As Ed Lewis and Doc Williams remember,
we used to start on Stone Church Hill there.
Yep.
And slide. It was a lot steeper then, right in front of the Masonic Temple, in front, and slide down the main street.
Or we'd go sliding after supper. We'd slide all evening, and there was only one car an hour.
This imposing Greek Revival-style home offers architectural proof of the wealth that migrated as commerce and industry shifted from east to west Poultney. Industrialist Henry Ruggles built this house in 1845 to be near the water-powered machine shop and foundry that he had purchased from Henry Stanley, where the famous Stanley stoves were fabricated. Ruggles, of course, renamed the business the Ruggles Foundry. The house has an unusual configuration, an entrance porch with two fluted Doric columns. It has a spiral staircase, and over 100 cast iron rosettes surround the paneled windows in the entrance hall. The red slate chimney, a covered entrance known as a porte cochere, and the rear wing were added in the 20th century. Poultney was the halfway point on the turnpike and proved to be a welcome break in a long journey where passengers could rest overnight. As early as 1800, an inn and tavern operated here. In 1824, Joel Beeman built this current building as a stage station along the route of the old turnpike, serving travelers through most of the 19th century. Stagecoaches stopped here to change horses. The three-stall barn behind the house served as the stables. At its peak, the hotel accommodated about 30 guests. After canals and railroads replaced stagecoaches, Beeman's Hotel became primarily an inn. The practical nature of housing guests led to periodic remodelings of the hotel, with many design errors apparent in this single building. The Victorian porch is probably a newer addition, while the recessed door with side-light windows may be the oldest element. The house to the left, once part of the Beeman Hotel, was detached, moved, and reconstructed in the 1940s as a separate home. Poultney was a town of turnpikes and travelers, but also a town deeply rooted in religion. Here at the United Methodist Church, we note a second milestone in the concentration of industry, commerce, and education in West Poultney. Built in 1841, it was a replacement for the stone church to the east. The church was moved in part to serve a new population in town, the students of Troy Conference Academy, founded at the west end of Main Street in 1834 as a Methodist school for higher learning. Church services were considered a daily part of the lives of the citizens, students, and faculty of the town, twice on Sunday. So the local Methodist Society built this church in a more central part of town, which allowed enough time for the students to walk back to the academy for the midday meal and return in time for the second service. The design of the church comes from a pattern book authored by Asher Benjamin, who brought classical architecture to the American frontier. The builder was Charles Scott, son of Elisha, who had constructed many of the landmark buildings in East Poultney. For $12,000, the Poultney Graded School was constructed in 1885, a year after Vermont's native son, Chester A. Arthur, had completed his presidency. Now, immigrants were arriving to work the nearby slate quarries. The graded school, in its scale and size, was constructed to accommodate a growing population of the town's children, immigrants and locals alike. Equally important, it marked a change from the dispersed one-room schoolhouses to a centralized education system. The school's design echoes the gravity of its mission. The era when it was constructed, the post-Civil War Gilded Age, so-called, was noteworthy for social change and prosperity. It was also noted for an eclectic blend of building styles. The graded school features the tall windows typical of Italianate design, the fancy filigree of Queen Anne, and the balanced wings of colonial revival. Former students Ed Lewis and Doc Williams tell what it was like to learn your values here.
I remember the first day I went to school down there, they rung a bell for you to come in. It's time to come in. and everybody run like the dickens, and I was the first one up to the door. And Mrs. Van Guyler grabbed me by the shirt and said, "You go out to the sidewalk and walk in here like a gentleman." That was my first experience at Poultney Elementary School.
And when you got out, school was dismissed. You all went out in the hall and you lined up and you walked out to the street, and they had a bass and a snare drum and two people playing. And when I was in the second grade, you got out of line or out of step, Minnie Carlton would have you right by the ear and yank you right out, and you paid for it somehow.
Today, the schoolrooms have been reconfigured as the schoolhouse apartments, which serve senior citizens living in the town of Poultney. Reacting to the shift in population and prestige, religious congregations in the East Village moved to join the Methodists in the West Village. In 1866, both the Episcopalians and the Baptists began holding services on alternate Sundays in Poultney Village. In 1868, Trinity Episcopal Church was erected on the newly graded Church Street in Gothic Revival style with narrow and steeply pointed arch windows. The crisp roofline contrasts with the square steeple. On this roof, you see the geological trait that helps to define Poultney. It's slate. The first slate quarry in the area opened in 1845. The range of slate colors, black, green, red, even purple, makes our region unique and our slate a key element to the town's economic growth. Note the color of the red slate repeated in the red door. With its complementary colors and red rosettes, this is one of the more stunning examples of slate work in Poultney. Now, these slate roofs last up to 150 years if well cared for. Here's one of those school kids, Doc Williams, remembering how it was to grow up and work with slate in the quarries and on the roofs.
Slate is a boom or bust thing. You know, you're busy for a while and then the market goes down. And I went roofing. And I roofed it for off and on for 20 years. I retired off it. I can get on the street and say I worked on that one, that one, that one. I don't know why I haven't been on that one. I've been on all the churches, and both churches in East Poultney and all the schoolhouses except the new elementary.